My name is Richard Fife. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to welcome you here to St. Elizabeth's tonight. Thank you for joining us. I think we have an exhilarating program for you. It's that way in part because you are here with us. So thank you for coming. Before I introduce our music director, who will tell you more about our speakers tonight and the program, I have one logistical detail to cover. I think lights are on a cream-colored Lexus XXM 1606 in this parking lot here. If someone wanted to attend to that, that probably would be a good plan. All right, I'd like to introduce now St. Elizabeth's music director, Kara Modisette, who will tell you more about our speakers and our program tonight. Kara.
Good evening, and thank you very much for being here tonight. It's wonderful to have everyone here. I just wanted to give a little bit of quick background into what we are doing and into our speakers tonight. About a year and a half ago, we started a benefit concert series here, and we're starting to add speakers to that series. And so this is actually our inaugural program, non-musical program this evening. And we're seeking to create a space for conversation. Programs that allow us to engage in dialogue about faith, spirituality, community, humanity. And Leigh Anne Taylor and Joe Cobb are our opening program. They're going to be reading from their new book, Our Family Outing, a memoir of coming out and coming through. And then we'll follow that with an opportunity for Q&A and discussion, and then we'll follow that with a reception in the parish hall with brownies and coffee and a book signing. And so we hope that you will stay around for that as well. I've had the joy of working with Leigh Anne and Joe on their book since April, last April, almost a year ago, when they asked if I would help with editing. And what struck me from the beginning is that their story is not just the story of one man and one woman, one family, one marriage, and one divorce. It is one story, yes, but it's many stories. It's a story of transformation, growth, understanding of self. It's the story of how we define love, and how love changes and how love doesn't change. It's a story of faith, doubt, spirituality, ministry, forgiveness, healing. It is, in a sense, everyone's story, and that's why it's important to be told. I'd like to give you all a little bit of background on Joe and Leigh Anne, if you haven't already read their bios. Leigh Anne Taylor lives in these mountains, where her family has lived for generations. She's ordained in the United Methodist Church. She's worked as a church musician and a musical director in Texas, Kansas, and Virginia. She's a graduate of James Madison University, which is nice for me. It's my alma mater as well. And Southern Methodist University. But she feels her most advanced degrees have been earned from the School of Life. She enjoys a lifelong interest in music, worship, spirituality, and the symbolic language of dreams. She's married to Hugh Ballou, and has 2 young adult children, Emma and Taylor. Joe Cobb lives in Roanoke, where he serves as clergy with Metropolitan Community Churches. He is a native of Kansas. He has a BA in philosophy from Southwestern College and a Master of Divinity from Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University in Texas. He was raised in the United Methodist Church and called to ministry in 1981. He was ordained as a deacon in 1985, an elder in 91, and he served for 20 years in parish ministry. 5 years after coming out, Joe was ordained in the Metropolitan Community Church, where he currently serves a growing community in Southwest Virginia. He also enjoys writing and singing. I think I first got to know you through music and also through your work at Interfaith Hospitality Network. Alongside his 2 young adult children, Emma and Taylor, he and his partner James Matthews have 2 young children, Ginny and JJ. So I'd like to turn the program over to them now, and I'm hoping that microphone will work. Please join us, and please join me in welcoming Leigh Anne and Joe.
The Pass-Off, June 2008. I'm going to write our story. I told several trusted friends after listening to a stirring sermon that challenged us to have the courage to do what God was calling us to do. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, waves of doubt and fear came over me. It's too personal. We'll be too vulnerable. It's too hard. I told myself over and over again, trying to talk myself out of it. A week later, I was reunited with some longtime friends at a conference in North Carolina. One friend told me of the heartbreak of learning that her husband was gay. He seemed trapped in silence and sadness. I listened and shared some of our story. She was encouraged to know that she was not alone, and relieved to find someone who understood the private agony that she was going through. This was the affirmation that I needed to overcome my doubt. If telling the story of how we had come through our trials could help someone, I could take the risk of being vulnerable. I decided to tell Joe the first time I saw him.
Late on a hot June afternoon, I pulled off of Interstate 40 near Charlotte and into the parking lot of a convenience store. Steering past the gas pumps, I parked next to a white SUV. The car's familiar license tag was a welcome sight as Leigh Anne, Emma, Taylor, and Hugh climbed out of the car and onto the hot pavement. The kids gave quick hugs, asked for money, then disappeared into the store. Hugh paced the perimeter of the parking lot, finishing up a business call. Leigh Anne and I talked by the car. Leigh Anne, smiling, said, "I'm ready to write." "Me too," I said. "It's time," we said in near unison. One by one, Hugh hung up the phone, Emma and Taylor emerged from the store, and each of them joined our conversation. We shared our readiness to tell our family's story and asked for their support. Each, in their way, said, "Go for it." Of all the pass-offs we had made with the children through the years, from early meetings at a hotel in Illinois after a 12-hour drive, to our usual weekly meeting at Dixie Caverns between Blacksburg and Roanoke after a 30-minute drive, this pass-off marked our passage into a new season of life, a season of storytelling, truth-telling, and moving forward. Now we have passed into the season of sharing. Here is our story. We begin the book by diving in to the middle of what created all of this. And so this is a portion of what created all of this. This is called Queen Anne. I'm sitting in a Queen Anne chair talking to my therapist. This is my reality. I'm 36 years old. I have a wife and 2 children whom I love very much and don't want to hurt. Leigh Anne and I have been married for 13 years. I am one of 4 pastors at a large downtown United Methodist Church. My wife is the director of music. The worship services are broadcast live every Sunday morning on a major network. I've been a pastor for more than 17 years. This is what God called me to, what I trained for, what I have been ordained to. My grandma, parents, and brother's family are all members of this church. According to my mom, I'm the perfect child. The therapist asked me if there is something I'd like to share. I nestle into Queen Anne. I'm struggling with homosexuality. Brace yourself, Queen. Here it comes. I'm honored that you shared your struggle with me, she said.
was a Monday night. Joe and I were sitting on the couch in the basement in front of the television. Joe had been to the therapist that day, and I was hoping he would talk about his session with her, about his depression and workaholism. I was completely unprepared for what he was about to say to me. He started by reminding me about the trip he had taken 18 months earlier to a national singles ministry event in Missouri, instead of coming to the beach with my extended family in North Carolina. He explained that he had met a man there, that they had been intimate. I've been with a man. I don't know if I'm gay or straight. I simply did not register the meaning of his words. My immediate response was to punch him in the arm playfully and say, "Don't you ever do that to me again." We didn't say much more to each other that night, but simply followed our usual evening routine and went to bed. I have no idea how I slept that night. I slept all night long without waking. On Tuesday morning, I remembered getting up and getting dressed in a full denim skirt and navy blue cotton sweater with big pastel flowers embroidered on it. As I was blow-drying my hair, I looked into my own reflection and understood clearly for the first time what Joe had said to me the night before. The reality of his words felt like a knife. I doubled over with physical pain, feeling as if I had been sliced from my breastbone to my belly. It hurt so intensely that I was sure that there must be blood on my clothing. In retrospect, I believe I went into shock at this point. I numbly went through the motions of the morning ritual and drove myself to work. Joe did not go to work. When I got to work, I realized it was Tuesday, staff meeting day. I didn't want to be with people, but I went because I didn't know what else to do. I walked in the long hallway toward our meeting room and met up with our administrative assistant, whose friendly, "Good morning, how are you?" were the first words I heard that day. "Linda, I don't want to be here. All I know is I can't be at home, and I don't know what else to do. Just don't be surprised if I leave." Early in the afternoon, I drove myself to the mall and parked far away from any other cars in the lot. I sat for a long time, unable to get out. Finally, I felt as if an emotional dam burst in my body and everything I had been holding back came roaring out of my mouth. I screamed, I cried, I wailed, I lamented like I had never done before in my life and have never done since. The searing physical pain in my solar plexus burned hot again, and I lifted my sweater to make sure I was not bleeding. As the intensity of the lament waned, a strange and quiet awareness came over me. This is what it feels like to be alive, I thought. This pain is proof that I'm alive, not proof that I am dying. With that, I was able to dry my face and go inside. I bought a pair of black velour pants and 2 long chenille sweaters with long sleeves and cowl necks in blue and purple. Blue, black, purple, the color of bruises. Soft and warm. After I purchased the garments, I did not go back to work, but went home to be with the children and Joe. I took off the denim skirt and flowered sweater and never put them on my body again. I threw them in the trash. I was able to see our therapist on Wednesday that week. I deliberately chose to wear the comfort clothes that I bought the day before, along with some flat black boots that laced up. When I arrived, I took my usual place across the room from her in the comfortable Queen Anne chair. "How are you, Leigh Anne?" she asked. Before I answered, I bent over to untie my boots so I could tuck my feet in under myself, and I could not sit up. I collapsed forward, sobbing. She was beside me in an instant and held me in her arms until my crying ceased. This was the first moment of my new, real life. The first moment on the other side of denial.
From the Monday that Leigh Anne described, we agreed to spend as much time as it took for me to figure out who I was, and for us to figure out if we could remain married together and what that would look like. And that year was very much like a roller coaster, probably more so even for Leigh Anne than it was for me. But there were a number of events that happened during the course of that year, and one particular event that was essential in my own understanding of my sexual orientation and my identity was this. It's called a wink and a smile. On the evening of our 13th anniversary, Leigh Anne and I went out to dinner and then to Borders Books and Cafe to browse. 1 year after my self-revelation, we were still working with a marriage and family therapist, seeking to determine the best way forward in our relationship. I was still torn by hope and fear. My hope was to find clarity regarding my sexual orientation. My fear was everything else: radical change, an unknown future, endings that I couldn't comprehend. I went to the poetry section and picked up Emily Dickinson. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the song without the words and never stops at all. Leaning against literature while reading poetry, I looked down the aisle of science fiction and mystery. A clerk walked toward me, followed by 2 men. The third man wore a red bandana, brown curls of hair peeking out from beneath. As he turned the corner between mystery and science fiction, he winked and smiled. I nearly dropped Emily Dickinson. I had no words, only a reality, a knowing. This will be the terrible and liberating gift.
As Joe said, we agreed that we would stay together until Joe could be sure about what he wanted for himself, and then we would determine how we would respond to that together as a couple. And we did mutually agree that for our individual wholeness, we could not remain in our marriage. And so we mutually agreed to divorce. And it was an excruciating decision to make. But we knew that neither of us could be whole and remain in the marriage. Our house was on the market. The papers were ready for us to sign. The realtor was in our house with the couple who would eventually buy the house, and we were in the living room. This is the setting. The day that Joe and I signed the papers, we met in the formal living room of our house on Herschel Road. While we were talking, a realtor was showing the house to the couple who would ultimately purchase it. It was awkward to have such an intimate and difficult conversation with strangers wandering through the house, but we did it. In doing so, we set the course for the next season of our lives, a course that enabled us to write this book 10 years later. When we signed the papers, we vowed to speak and act in loving ways toward one another and about one another, especially in front of the children, and for the sake of the children. It means a lot to say that with your child sitting before you. This new vow, which was as important as the one we made on our wedding day, had the same guiding and restraining power that our wedding vows had had for me. I was unfaithful to the second vow only once when I spoke bitterly about Joe with a girlfriend. I was ashamed of myself for blaming Joe as soon as I said the words. It was enough to stop me in the future, to cause me to measure my words, to give Joe the dignity that he deserved, and to take the high road of mutual respect and honor. I did not have the power to do this by myself. I wanted to blame, to suffer, to play the victim, to invoke pity from others. I did not have this power to speak and act in loving ways toward Joe and about Joe within me. I had to pray and journal daily, to work it out, to ask for help, to halt my bitter thoughts and my tongue. I could not have done it without daily spiritual, emotional, and psychological work.
Sometime after Leigh Anne interviewed for and accepted a new job in Blacksburg, we discussed the reality of moving with the kids to Virginia. The thought of being so far from the kids was devastating to me, but I also knew how healing the move would be for Leigh Anne. I couldn't imagine limiting her or them in any way. One of the papers I had to sign, since we agreed on joint custody of the children, was my consent for them to move with their mother to another state. While I felt as though I were signing everything away, I knew this would be a step toward all of our healing. I also knew that we would do everything we could to ease the distance for the kids, planning visits and lots of phone calls, and making space for each of us to grow into our new lives. The day we signed the divorce papers is a blur in my memory. Our house was on the market. Leigh Anne was beginning to pack things for a move and finish things up at work, and I was trying to be supportive while grieving along with them. What I do remember is that even in the reality of the papers in front of us on the coffee table, there was such love between us. The pain of signing papers legally ending our marriage was transformed into a buoyant hope as we spoke new vows to speak and act in loving ways toward each other and about each other, for the sake of the children and for our health and wholeness. Though we didn't write the words down and sign them as an official document, they were etched in our souls and set as a seal of honest, authentic love.
This excerpt is called Just Happy. This took place after the children and I moved to Blacksburg, and we were preparing for a visit, maybe one of the first visits from Joe to see the kids after we were here. No, it was not one of the first. It was a long way. It was a long way. Just happy. The kids and I were riding in the car to my parents' house. Everyone was grumpy, including me. I could not tolerate the continuous whining tone of the children's voices. I asked them if they were anxious about Daddy coming. No, they replied, just happy. I told them I was glad he was coming to see them, but I was also sad and angry, and that was why I was grouchy. Taylor said, you know what I do when I feel sad? I ask a friend to play with me. It happens a lot at school. In a brief attempt to do what Taylor suggested, I experimented with internet dating. On my one and only date with bachelor number 1 from Bristol, Tennessee, whom I affectionately named Norge, I got more than I bargained for when he turned to get out of the car in 2 snug jeans that didn't quite meet with his too short shirt tail in the back. I don't enjoy the sight of cleavage cleavage in males or females in front of her, accidentally or on purpose. On my one and only date with bachelor number 2 from Pulaski, Virginia, whom I affectionately named Come Over Guy, I endured an hour and a half of stories about how his ex-wife had spent every dime he had ever made. When he asked me if I would go out with him again, and I firmly said, no thanks, he asked if I would kiss him anyway. I was all out of pity kisses. On my third date with bachelor number 3 from Blacksburg, whom I affectionately named Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire, he made a fast exit from dinner out when his mother called. He was stupid enough to tell me later that it was his ex-girlfriend who called, and he left because he thought he might get lucky. He was never lucky enough to date me again. 3 strikes were enough to prove to me that internet dating was not an effective way for me to find appropriate friends to play with. I gave up this experiment and focused on other ways to open my life to love in all of its forms.
One of the things that was really important to us through all of the transitions was to be very open and honest with our kids, realizing that at the ages they were, about 6 and 4, that they wouldn't understand everything. But if we tried to pull anything on them, they would figure that out pretty quickly. So there wasn't any reason for us to mislead them in any way or be dishonest. So one day, I had taken Emma and her cousin Gus to some activity, and this is the conversation that took place. "Why don't you live with Emma and Taylor?" my 6-year-old nephew Gus asked into the space of the car. "Because Daddy and Mommy are getting a divorce," answered my 6-year-old daughter Emma. "Why?" asked Gus. "'Cause Daddy is gay," answered Emma. "What does that mean? Is he going to have another girlfriend?" Gus asked. "No," answered Emma. "He needs to be with a boy the rest of his life."
This reading is fast forwards quite a lot. A series of events at the table, part 3, Joe's ordination at the Metropolitan Community Church. I was reluctant to go. I was only going because the children had asked me to accompany them on a song they were singing for the service at the Metropolitan Community Church in Roanoke. I raced off after my duties at church that morning, dressed in my red Pentecost suit. I wear it when I really need to call on the power of the Holy Spirit to help me, and I was sure that I needed her help that day. I had been at both of Joe's previous ordinations as a deacon at the church where we would eventually serve. I had stood with him, a starry-eyed fiance, at his first ordination as a deacon at the church that we would eventually serve. I had stood with him at his second ordination as an elder. He had stood with me at my consecration as a diaconal minister. These were the highest moments in our personal and professional journeys, and ones that we had shared intimately as a couple. Being there for this ordination brought up too many images and memories of the past, of loss, of what had been. I was not sure what my emotional response would be, and if it was intense, I was not sure that I would be able to bear it with dignity in such a public and solemn setting as this. On the one hand, I wanted to go to this church that had welcomed my children so warmly. I wanted to meet the people they talked about so fondly. But on the other hand, I didn't want to get near what I called, in my mind that day, that freak church. What would a whole church of gay, lesbian, and transgender folks look like anyway? I confessed my reluctance to God as I drove to that service that afternoon. I was a total stranger to every person that I met at the door, in the sanctuary, and in the hallways of the church that day. And I have never been greeted more warmly at any church, anywhere, in all of my lifelong professional experiences in church. I discovered that a church full of gay, lesbian, and transgender folks looks like any other congregation you might walk into. Young and old, dark, fair, casual, formal, folks alone, folks in pairs, in family groups, just folks. And I was made to feel welcomed, very welcomed that day. I accompanied, I sang, I worshiped, I sat in the front pew with my children and my former in-laws, surrounded by a congregation of friends who supported Joe in his ordination as a minister in the Metropolitan Community Church. Eventually, I was invited to receive communion at the Lord's table. That's where it happened. That's where heaven broke in. I didn't want to go. I hadn't wanted to be in that freak church. I didn't want to walk into the pain of my past, of my losses. But the Holy Spirit had another thing in mind. I had not worn that Pentecost suit for nothing, because I was wrapped in the powerful and loving embrace of God's Holy Spirit at the Lord's table that day. We were invited to come to the front of the sanctuary in a small group to receive communion. When it was our turn, our group included Joe, Emma, Joe's parents, Bill and Marilyn, Joe's sister Nancy, and me. We held hands or wrapped our arms around each other's as Joe prayed. We each received the bread and the cup, the gift of Christ's body and blood, broken and poured out for our forgiveness, for our welcome at Christ's table. I sobbed during Joe's prayer, not dignified sniffling, but full-throated, shoulder-racking sobs. As he prayed, I literally felt as if a river of reconciliation was coursing through my entire being. If there was any unfinished business left anywhere in my spirit, it was totally washed clean that day. After each one of us received the Lord's Supper from Joe, I embraced him for the first time in years and offered him the kiss of peace on each cheek and asked God to bless him. I do not feel that I bore the intense emotional response to Joe's ordination with dignity, but I did bear it with honesty. After the service, 2 men approached me to tell me how much my presence had meant to them in that service. I suppose it's not very common for a straight ex-spouse to show up in a church with a blessing to offer. I was glad that they could be encouraged by my presence. I did not confess to them how hard it was for me to be there. Likewise, after the service, James approached me to offer me kindness that I will never forget. You are the classiest person I have ever met. If I could have 1/10 of the class you have, I'd be lucky. It may have looked like class that day, but I am sure it was much more like grace.
We would like to open it up for questions and discussion now. The book is interesting because similarly to how you've been listening to them read, it's told back and forth, alternating between their voices very much in this way, kind of snapshot by snapshot in a way. So thank you very much for sharing those excerpts. I thought I might open with a question or two and then ask for questions from tonight's group. Leigh Anne, you just talked about feeling like you had any unfinished business had been cleaned in Joe's ordination, and you all wrote this 10 years later, and I'm at a point where you had reconciled, where you had built new lives with each other and with others. But I'm wondering if in the process of writing, what you found out that you didn't know, that was new and that you were not expecting, even with that distance.
You know, an interesting question. It was a courageous decision. Well, actually, when I told Joe I was ready to write, I didn't know that we would end up writing it in the same book. But the more we talked about it, the more we realized that it probably doesn't exist. This story from both points of view. There are books out there written by straight spouses about their experiences. There are stories out there, coming out stories, but we didn't know of anything that was both people in the couple telling the story through, not just of the coming out, but life through it and beyond it and what life can be. So it was kind of gutsy to say, okay, let's do this together, because at that point there were very big blanks in my knowledge of Joe's experience. Once we were divorced, we didn't talk about everything, and frankly, writing it together forced us to say more to each other than probably most couples who were divorced ever had the opportunity to say to one another. Some of that was really hard. Some of what was really hard didn't make it in the book. I mean, it's just too hard. And that was okay. It was good to edit those things out. You didn't need to hear all that. But it was probably pretty darn cathartic for us to tell it. And, we did a lot of writing at Mill Mountain in Salem, and there were times when we were, just wiping the tears away and, crying into our cups of coffee as we were trying to figure out what's included, what's not. And the other thing for me is just that profound sense of having courageously brought up those subjects with each other, and again and again, there were opportunities to say, I'm sorry, forgive me, I forgive you.
I just remember we would each write certain segments out or snapshots, and then we would send them to each other to read, and then we would get back together to talk about them and see where they fit in the structure of the book. And like Leigh Anne said, there were some things that she wrote that I read that I was completely unaware of. And it was probably nice that we each had an opportunity to read those things in our own space and didn't have to react to each other immediately in front of each other. But the thing that was very easy about it was one of the things that really drew us to each other in the first place was that we really just liked each other. We enjoyed each other's company. We always had plenty of things to talk about, and so that part of it was very easy. We could talk about it. We could, because we were honoring this vow that we had made, it was much easier for us to practice that. We had not stopped communicating ever. And so this was another extension of learning to communicate in some new ways, which was very reconciling.
Of course, a big part of your story, which is unique, is that you are both clergy and you're both ministers. And I wondered, obviously your experiences before the book and writing of the book impacted your work as clergy in big ways, but I also wondered how it has impacted your work as clergy, your ministry, in the everyday sense, if that makes sense.
I need to think of something.
Well, the best part for me is I have no more secrets. I spent 20 years protecting my secrets and never talked about them, and I don't have that veil over me anymore. And so, while I was secretly, behind the scenes cheering anytime anyone would get up at a United Methodist conference and push for full inclusion of GLBT people in the life of the church and to be openly ordained, I never got up to say that because I was too afraid that it might reveal something about me. And now, I celebrate any movement toward that in any mainline churches, and happen to be in a church that celebrates that all the time. What I find myself struggling against now are some other issues that people in my congregation face when they are afraid or feel limited in being who they fully are for fear of losing a job or for fear of someone in their family ostracizing them or for fear of their life. And I regret that we still live in a world where those fears exist, but it's wonderful to feel a sense of liberation to be able to stand with them and advocate for them and be a voice in the community. And for me, that's a very special honor.
Kara, I would say that with the publication of this book, now is when my ministry changes. As a church musician, all of my professional life, I've been friends with gay men, because where would we be without our we wouldn't have any church organist. Where would I be without my organist? I mean, I'd be nothing. So I have always been friends with gay musicians, and I know that my friends have known me to be open and accepting and never judgmental. I've been that way quietly, and now with the publication of this book, it's sort of coming out for me among my colleagues and in the United Methodist Church, to speak love, to speak acceptance, and to take a stand. And it's taken some courage to do that, but it takes about a nano bit of courage for me to do that as compared to what it has required of my gay and lesbian friends to come out. So I think I can have the guts to do it. I'll just be a liberal.
It would be wonderful to hear from some of you all who may have questions, or perhaps some stories of your own. Don't be shy.
Well, I appreciate so much you sharing your story. It's very powerful. I I've got two questions. The first, would you like to come and speak into this? I'm not sure how all of The first question is this available like on the internet, like where people can share? Because like I've got friends who had similar experiences where they were married and their spouse ended up being gay, and so is that available for people?
It will be very soon.
Okay. The other question I have, I feel like it's a real personal question, but I'm curious, and if it's too personal, I completely understand. But where your story began that you shared with us today was you were already married when you struggled with homosexuality. Earlier, like during your adolescence, before you got married, was that something that you were aware of, but you stopped because society wasn't accepting of that, and so you thought that that wasn't an option for you, or was this something that bloomed later on in your life?
I was aware at a pretty young age, and in fact, after the two opening chapters, the first section talks about when I tell Leigh Anne, then it goes back to when I knew, and I recount some incidents throughout the years. I remember a conversation that I had forgotten, but remembered in the writing of this book, that I'd had with a college roommate when I was going into ordained ministry, pursuing that path. And he asked me one day if I was going into ministry to avoid dealing with my sexuality. And I said yes. Wow. And I had forgotten it. But I knew from a very early age that I was attracted in just about every way to men, and didn't know how to talk about it. One of my favorite memories is a photo of me when I was about 12, emerging from the bathroom, and I was dressed in drag. Didn't call it that day, I was just dressing up for Halloween. But standing right behind me was my mom, who had helped me put rouge on my cheeks and a little lipstick on my lips, and she was smiling just as broadly as I was. And I asked her, the two people that were the next most difficult in coming out to were my parents. And about a year after I came out to them, I asked my mom if she knew, and she said, well, I wondered in high school. But then you married Leigh Anne, and I just didn't think about it anymore. So it kind of gave me some reassurance that Mom was, Mom and Dad both were aware, even though they nor I had the ability to talk about it then. So that was reassuring.
Too bad I wasn't aware. I do talk about that in the book.
I think there was another question, and I think for matters of sound, if I could either repeat questions just so we make sure that everyone hears them, or if anyone would like to come to the mic, it doesn't move much beyond this radius, unfortunately. So
I'll speak boldly.
that sounds great.
I wonder if you could unpack that statement you made a minute ago a little bit more. When your college roommate asked you if you were going into the ministry to avoid addressing your sexuality, and you said yes. What does that mean? I don't understand that.
I think at the time it meant that I was focused on just being a pastor, and I wasn't thinking about anything sexual. I wasn't thinking about relationships. My relationship was solely focused on being a pastor in the church, and probably being in relationship with the church, which happened in many ways during our marriage, and it was a way for me to avoid dealing with the stress that our relationship was going through. also was afraid of, though the church had talked some about sexuality issues, it was always so polarizing, and there never seemed to be any progress or even any real healthy space for conversation about it, where someone could be questioned. And and that was part of it for me. I think if I had been in an environment where I could have openly questioned as a part of my own searching and seeking to understand myself within the context of exploring ministry, I might have not denied it so strongly. But I, for whatever reason, didn't feel that existed. And so I just buried it. I didn't talk about it. Does that help some?
You thought it didn't exist because, in fact, I think it didn't.
It didn't.
And
I mean,
it
it really
doesn't.
didn't. It didn't.
Thank you.
Joe, if you don't mind, I can help answer her question. I went into the clergy because I had to be the good boy. And if I would do the good thing, I could overcome the guilt of being so terrible. I was raised a Southern Baptist, if that explains anything. And I didn't accept the fact. I lived most of my life suicidal. My wife, I was always afraid to come home because she's afraid she would find me dead. I did not accept the fact that I was gay until I turned 60. And we chose to stay together. We've been married 55 years. And it's not easy. It's basically an open marriage if the bishop finds out I'm defrauded. And I am an Episcopal clergy. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to take away from what you were saying.
I'd probably maybe ask a question too, because for me, I was in seminary, I didn't finish. For me, I came out at a young age of 17, not turned away from the church. I grew up around here as a Pentecostal tradition fundamentalist, and eventually came to the Episcopal tradition. But for me, I did feel a call to do ordained ministry at some point, but when I came out, I just was so angered by the tradition I grew up in. I ended up going to seminary. I went to a very liberal seminary. So for me, that was my coming out process to God. So I know you had, and I came out to God now. For me, I'm fine with being a gay Christian, and I don't see a problem with that. But I went to seminary to come out to God. So I wonder, what was it like for you in your coming out to God in that part?
It's time for brownies.
Or a sequel.
Actually, that's or a sequel.
Hey, Joe, if you ever thought about God knew it, you didn't.
I think my coming out to God, it probably started with the gift that the therapist gave to me. Part of what I dreaded about going to a therapist was that I was concerned that someone would hear what I said and then just quickly say, well, that's a phase you're going through. I'm here, I'll help you work through it. And what she said, the thing that scared me the most was just speaking the words, I'm struggling with homosexuality. And she said, I'm honored that you shared your struggle with me. And that was the first gift of my coming out to God. And it has really it really captured my whole experience of God throughout my whole life. I didn't grow up in a fundamentalist household. I always felt loved and accepted. My parents adopted me when I was 7 weeks old and showed me nothing but unconditional love. The church that I grew up in, the pastors that were mentors for me, always expressed through their messages and through their who they were, love. So I was really surrounded by that. But then the second thing in that whole journey that was really helpful was after we separated and I moved out, I went to a retreat in Abiquiu, New Mexico, at Ghost Ranch, which is a Presbyterian retreat center. And it's beautiful landscape. It's in the desert. I went there to go to a workshop on the writings of Henry Nouwen, who is one of my heroes in the spiritual life. And the thing that I connected most with Henry Nouwen was his ministry of hospitality, that it's not, that it's a way of living, and that it's about creating a free space where a stranger can enter your life and become a friend instead of an enemy. And I really tried to practice that, but I needed to practice it for myself, on myself. I was really good at practicing it with other people, but I wasn't good on practicing it for myself, or believing that God wanted that for me. The leader of that retreat was Chris Glosser, who was to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church in the late 70s, but because he was openly gay, he was denied ordination. But he chose to stay in the relationship with the Presbyterian Church and work from the inside out. And now, 40 years later, the Presbyterian Church is ordaining openly gay people. But he had written a book called Coming Out to God. And it was full of prayers that he had written. And so it was a gift to be with Chris during that week, to have time to talk with him and to be in this nest of Henry Nouwen's writings with 11 other people. And so those two experiences really helped shape my beginnings. And that was years after I'd gone to seminary. But that was the beginning of my coming out to God.
How did your kids handle this, and how do you think it shaped them over the years, or guided them over the years?
What? Can you maybe talk?
You want to answer?
I don't know. Okay. You want me to?
You can think of it. This is our daughter, Emma.
I don't remember a lot about when they first told us. I remember both of them being really sad all the time, and Taylor and I just wanted them to be happy. And I really don't remember a lot, but I do remembering them really trying to tell us everything and explain in ways that we would understand. And there's actually in the book a story that Mom wrote for us to try and help us understand what was happening. And I think that in reading their book, my life has sort of become 3D. That makes sense. Because there are so many things that Taylor and I were completely unaware of, because they surrounded us with so much love and kept a lot of their pain from us. And I, in the past couple of years, have learned a lot about what they were going through that I really had no idea. And they've always worked very hard to make sure that we knew that we were loved, and that just because they weren't together didn't mean that, I don't know if I can say this right. Never mind. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. What was the other part of the question?
Do you think it's formed you, this experience?
I mean, your outlook on life or people, do you think you're more accepting of people than
I think we probably are more accepting of people than most people are, because nothing really phases us.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's been really helpful in relationships with friends whose families are going through hard things like this. Maybe not even the same, but I mean, my family's really weird, so people. I feel like I'm able to reach out to people who are going through similar situations and be give them some hope that things can be good, and in love there can always be healing. So.
I want to add a couple things because I'm very proud of our kids, and I appreciate how they've been open with us about experiences that they've had. And Emma told me one time about a conversation, I think you maybe were a sophomore in high school, where she was in a conversation with some of her classmates, and they were bantering about something, and one of them said, "Oh, that's so gay." And Emma turned to this classmate, and I don't remember exactly what you told me, but it was something along the lines of, she turned to her friend and said, "Well, you know, my dad is gay. And I know that you're really smart, and that you're creative enough to come up with a better way of saying what you're trying to say." And Taylor and I were talking recently, probably in the last couple of years, about he wanted to be able to be the kind of person that if a classmate was struggling with their orientation and wanted to come out to him, that he would be the kind of person that they could trust.